Welcome back to Building Solid Foundations Radio. I'm your host, Steve Matley. In the studio now with me today, I have Dennis Selke. Dennis Selke is a cohort of mine at a college in San Diego, New School of Architecture and Design. That's where I met him. He has a fascinating background in history, and I could read through his whole thing, but I kind of want to talk to him with you about that journey. The main reason I wanted Dennis on is because he's got a very interesting story of how he got to where he is now and what that journey looks like. And I find it fascinating because so much of it was a late life transition. And I always find those kind of things very fascinating. So Dennis, welcome to Building Solid Foundations.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's always good to talk to you. We talk even at school sometimes and just enjoy the conversations. So that's one reason I wanted to have you on. So I met you when you came to work at the school as an instructor, but you had graduated already from graduate degree in architecture. Okay, so the typical student that starts on their journey to become a licensed architect is probably what age would you say?
Probably 20 years old.
20 years old or so, yeah,
Yep.
somewhere in that 18 to 22 time slot, right?
Yeah.
And they start their journey. And you did that. So tell us first about how you started on the journey and what happened there.
Yes, I first started on the journey working as a draftsman in the late 70s.
Okay.
And when it became time to go to college, then I started school at first in computer science of all things, but then after a year went and became a carpenter.
Now, did they call it data processing back then? DP?
They called it data processing then. And it was
Yes.
COBOL and Fortran.
My dad ran the data processing department for a junior college.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
And, then...
Punch cards.
Yeah, punch cards and mainframes.
Yes.
They had to have their own cooling systems for
the
computers.
And they put them up with the shop classes because they were noisy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, they are. Yep. And then so I started architecture school originally in 1980,
Okay.
which put me at 20 years old. And I went for 5 years and almost graduated.
And just so people know, architecture is a 5-year program. It's
Yes.
not. It's a 5-year because you do the 4-year typical undergraduate, and then you have a 5th year that's a thesis year.
Yes. And a
Okay.
mini theses. Yeah. And, at that point, I met my wife and decided to move to California
Okay.
for the opportunities in architecture.
And how close were you to finishing your degree at that point?
I was missing one class.
One class.
Yep.
Okay.
I had actually taken the final studio class and failed it, and it was a in-person school, so there was no online option in 1985.
Online hadn't been invented yet.
It wasn't invented. So
Yeah. Online were clothes drying if you couldn't afford a clothes dryer.
that's right. So went through and worked for some really exciting architecture firms, CRSS being one of them, and we worked on Cal State San Marcos, the master plan.
So you were working as a draftsperson
Working as a draftsperson then.
and pencils and triangles and all that stuff.
Yes, and computers at CRS.
Because computers were beginning to be used now.
Yep. And got to design the initial facility that my daughter actually graduated with her master's from that
Fantastic.
college. So it's a pretty strange career. And so when she was born, I decided to join in with my wife in her accounting firm. And so I brought the financial planning aspect into the accounting firm.
So you moved from drafting to financial planning.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that point, I had worked my way up to be CAD manager.
Okay.
So it was some drafting, but mostly making standards and, making sure that everybody's putting things on the right layers and that kind of thing. CAD cops, so to speak. And so at that point, so 20 years later, I decided that I really was not cut out for financial planning anymore. The business was dwindling. Clients were retiring. The business was becoming less and less profitable every year. So the last 5 years were just kind of 5 of the same years in a row, and really
So
not
you didn't live
satisfying.
5 years. You lived the same year 5 years, 5 times in a row. That's what
Yes.
you did. Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So this is what made me decide to retire, get rid of my practice, and go back to New School for my master's degree.
Okay. So, but you had to finish that bachelor's that you hadn't finished before. Is that right?
True. I did finish that.
Okay. And so what point did you do that?
I finished that in 2014.
Okay. So you had to start over from scratch?
Or
did you transfer credits over?
I went back to my initial college, Lawrence Tech in Southfield, Michigan, and they had an online master's program at that time. So I got accepted into that program and started working on it. But then they told me it's going to be 3 more years before they could offer all the classes.
Oh, I see.
So at that point, if I had taken one more class, I would qualify for the bachelor's degree.
Right.
So I did that one class, got my bachelor's degree from Lawrence Tech, and transferred into New School.
Okay. And so this is you left school, you got married, you raised a family, had an entire career in between.
Yes.
And then went back to school.
And went back to school.
Right. And was any of the previous schooling from 30 years before applicable? Did any of that count?
It did count towards my associate.
Okay. So they gave you 2 years of credit for your 5 years of work.
Yep. Yeah, they gave me two years of credit. And it didn't really count. And along the way, they actually had this funny little thing where there was an extra class that I was required to take, which was a psychology class. But the counselor told me it was a physics class. So apparently he was dyslexic or something like that. Psychology
and physics, so similar letters, very, very different.
PSY or PYS.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they're different disciplines. Yes.
And I'd already taken the physics class, so I even told him, well, why would I have to take it again? But this crazy hidden benefit of his mistake was I went back and took physics 2 at Miracosta College to try to fill that in.
Okay.
And I found out about quarks.
And what's that?
And that's another particle that they didn't teach us about in the physics class that I took the first time around in the 80s.
So was that a discovery that had happened in the decades in between?
Yes. And so that it's a weird, happy accident. I really didn't need to take that physics class, but I took the first half of it, and I found out a lot of weird, excellent information about physics that was discovered in the meantime.
Well, and that's what happens. That's why, education gets old, because the world keeps moving on, and we discover new things, and we create new things, and innovate new things. And, I think back to my education, and I'm pretty sure that at least 50% of what I learned in my formal education, higher education, probably is completely obsolete.
True.
Yeah. There's things that change all the time. Now, some of it doesn't. Accounting has been accounting forever. Basic management principles, they change a little, but overall, it hasn't changed a lot for human history. We put new names on it and call it new theories, but it's really all the same stuff. It's how do you get someone to do things because you need them to do it and make that they want to, for them wanting to do it, right? That's kind of what it is, right?
Making people want to do it.
People want to do it. That's right, because it's part of, it helps them, benefits them, right? That is what it is. Other things like technology are probably obsolete every few years.
If you're lucky, yeah. Probably every year now. Everything is a subscription, so it's constantly changing.
That's right. And I think science, basics of science, law of gravity, been around a long time, but you say the discoveries, especially in areas of astronomy, physics,
and smaller and smaller particles that we didn't even know existed.
A lot of the biology that goes on is changing. So that's fascinating. It's good to get updated and find out that it didn't just waste my time taking this class a second time.
And that made it worthwhile, because not wasting my time when it was a waste of time, really, but it wasn't a waste of time.
So then you transferred over to New School of Architecture and Design to take a graduate degree in architecture.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. And previously you had all but one class done in a terminal architecture degree that would have led to licensure. So now you're starting architecture, but when you do a master's degree, it's only 2 years.
Correct.
Because you've got all your lower division stuff done.
Yeah.
Through your bachelor's degree. So you're basically taking the last 2 years of architecture and then your thesis year.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you start that, and how old are you when you're doing this?
I finished my master's when I was 55.
Okay. And that's a lot of the story that I wanted to, get out to listeners. I don't know how many times I worked in 3 different colleges now.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 of them were very heavily career focused and had a lot of adult learners. And I don't know how many times I heard people say, if I went back to school now, I'd be like 50 years old when I graduate. And the question I want to ask them is, well, how old would you be in 4 years if you didn't go back to school? You'd probably still be 50 years old. Age. Exactly. Only you wouldn't have the degree, right?
That's right.
and we have this idea, and I understand it's the fish out of water problem. It's the I'm going in and I'm going to look like grandpa and all these young kids, and I don't even know how to relate to them because they grew up in a different world than I did, right?
That's true.
Yeah, I mean,
I was blessed that my daughter was their age, so I did have some idea of what they were thinking about.
Yeah. But still, you grew up in a different era because even, raising my daughters, there was a limit to how well I could relate to people their age because I grew up in an age where we didn't have microwave ovens and we didn't have VCRs and we didn't have an internet and we didn't have a phone that had everything in the world on it for you. You actually had to let the phone ring. And if you didn't answer it, you had no idea who it might have been. So you had to answer the phone if you want to know who it was.
If you really wanted to know.
And if you were on the phone and someone else called, you weren't going to find out who was calling.
Nope.
So it was a different world back then. So we're going to pick this conversation up on the other end of a break here. We've got to take a short break. So we're talking to Dennis Selke, and we're talking about kind of the mid to late life transitions and what that looks like. This is Building Solid Foundations Radio on KCAA. We'll be right back after this.